what is up, my tricksters? It's your friendly neighborhood Yu-Gi-Oh! Superhero back again. If you guys have been following me on Instagram, you know what I've been up to. I've been babysitting the last couple days, so that's why there's been a bit of a lack of content over here. That being said, we're going to be talking about some budget cards that I think you should have in your collection if you're a budget player. These are just going to be some things I think you should have on hand in your collection, and you know, just they're going to be useful things. They might be single cards, they might be engines, cards that might be considered filler, if you will, like if you need to fill out a deck, that kind of thing. But before we get into that, I want to remind you guys to go to your playmat. It's in the description at the top there below, and get yourself some custom sleeves. These things are awesome. I have my whole dinosaur deck sleeved in them. These are like some really high quality sleeves, and you can put pretty much anything you want on the back. Like, it's I can't tell you. Like, I really want to do something with your playmat with these. I don't know how or what, but I would really love to, like, you know, because I've been getting a little in touch with my artistic self. Hint, hint for things that are coming in the future. Maybe I should order some more sleeves with some of my own art, but you get the idea. I don't know. These are some really cool stuff. You can put pretty much anything you want on there. If you're an artist, put some of your art. If you're a tuber, you should put your logo or something that's associated with you on the back. You know what I mean? So you have something cool for people to ask questions at when we get events finally, when this whole COVID nonsense is over with. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let's go into this more vloggy type thing, and I'm going to show you some cards that I think you should have. So let me flip the camera. Alright, so I have a few different decks in here in this box. So I'm going to be showcasing a few cards from various decks, giving you guys budget ideas of cards I think you should have. So let's go ahead and we'll start with, I think my Thunder deck would be a good one. Alright, so one of the first things you definitely are going to want to have, I think, in your collection is you're going to want to have a copy of Instant Fusion and a Predaplant package. And of course, you'll need a few options. Now, I'm going to show you some options. Like, for example, this is for a Thunder deck, so it's something very specific. Now, for you budget players, you're going to be wanting things that are, like, you know, that are going to be easily accessible and cheap. So you may not necessarily want to think about more using this engine for things like levels and things like that. So I'm going to show you some cards I think you can easily get a hold of. Like, obviously you can get Mud Dragon. Obviously that's an easy one there. But you might also want to think about things that have been reprinted a few times, and you might also want to think about more along the lines of cards thinking about their level. We're just using this card as an example. These cards are easily accessible cards, because I know that a lot of these Instant Fusion targets can get a little expensive for what they are. But so if you're on a budget, specifically look for ones that have been reprinted and look at the level. Alright, because this is what's going to be important. Xyz decks are going to be the ones that can primarily be using this, as well as Link stuff. You can also use it for Links, you know, obviously, but I usually think about the levels for Xyz plays. So just an example there. This next part right here is going to be something that is very important, and this is the big thing right here. This binder right here has a lot of the stuff in it that I think is overly important, of kind of budget cards you want to try to keep on hand as much as you can. And I'm also going to try to leave you some tips on how to get a hold of some of those things. So let's go ahead and start with page 1 here. I have to do it this way. Alright, so one of the engines I think that you should probably try to have is like this. You want to have your Psychic Wielder and your Psychic Tracker duo. This is just something I think you should have in your collection. These cards are primarily going to be used for Xyz plays, I think, right now, but they are actually meant for synchros, and I think that later down the line these cards will become better. Especially the ban list has made these cards a little bit better with the release of E-Telly back. And then, of course, as you guys can also see on here in the same binder are things like kaijus. Now, the reason I want to say I'm showing you this sticky string in particular, and I'll be showing you, if we look up over here, you can see the Thunder one here. Basically, I'm just saying, whatever kaijus you can get your hand on, or even just kaiju-like monsters, which I'll pull out an example for you, just in case you don't know what I mean by that. is you just want to make sure that you have cards like them, at least. Because the point of the matter is with cards like Dragoon out, budget players are kind of at a disadvantage right now. So you also might want to have something like this on hand. Santa Claus right here is a kaiju-esque monster. It is not a kaiju, but you might want it to use it in that same manner. You just need to have something on hand. Like sometimes it doesn't matter, you know, like you know what I mean. Like, which would you rather face down? Would you? Everyone says Gamma Seal's the best, or Godarla right now is the best because the Windbearer statue. But when you're on a budget, you may not always have the options to be picky. So when that subject comes up, you just want to make sure you have some kind of option, because that's going to be, because you still would rather fight. No, let's face it, you would much rather fight this instead of a Dragoon any day of the week. Let's face it. One of the other cards I think you should have, I'm going to show you this right here. I think you should have a playset of Galaxy Worm. It's kind of like Tour Guide, except it only gets you another Galaxy Worm. So, but I think it's actually kind of neat. It's a neat little card. If you have a high special summon deck and maybe you're an Exceeds person, then you can kind of use this card as like your normal summon. Like I said, it's just going to thin the deck out by 1. It can also be Ash Bait. It's kind of cool like that. So, yeah. Alright, let's go on to the next thing I think you should have. Oh, also, before I go off, actually, it's all right here. You might want to get yourself a bamboo engine. Sometimes having just something to draw off of, like for example, if let's say you're a Goki player, right? You have Isolde, you can actually take advantage of this and use this to give your Goki deck draw power, or any deck that's abusing Isolde. Just FYI. Alright, now we're going to get into some more stuff I think you should try to keep on hand as a budget player, and here we go. This is one of the big ones right here. Let me hold the camera up a little bit so you guys can see. Alright, so as you guys can see here, we have the Performage engine. These are all commons. You can get these guys fairly cheap. I think you should ever have these guys on hand, especially because they're free summons. Damage Juggler, lesser known fact, especially if you haven't played the engine in a while, is going to stop effect damage. That can be handy in time. Hat Tricker also can do that. That's another thing it's able to do. And of course, you know, your Trick Clown here in the middle has the ability to come back. Another thing you might want to try to get your hands on is Stick and Chair. Obviously, Xyz era is kind of a very popular era for me, but that's just because that's one of the more effective ones to go for. I also think you should have things like Balbaboon. If you can afford it, have the statue. I know this card's fairly cheap right now. I don't know what the statue is going for exactly, but I do know that it can be a pretty penny for a common. Alright, now we're going to go over to the top engine here. Here are some other ones. You should probably have this one. Now, these guys aren't really all that abusable right now, but they could be more abusable in the future, and you should get them now while they're cheap. And Parallel Exceeds, I got these stupid cheap. And you might want to have because with the way the game's going, Baguska is a very powerful Exceeds monster. You definitely might want to have that on hand. So there you go. There's just a few other things. I think you should have some of these cards on hand. Now, let's see here. Next one. This whole binder, basically, for the most part, is just, you know, stuff like that. Alright, this is going to be more of an example, right? But I'm going to be showing you something. Alright, so you see a lot of these Tenyi monsters, right? You're thinking, oh, you're holding this for a Tenyi deck. Yes and no. I don't really play Tenyi, but I do use the Tenyis sometimes as extenders in other decks. So for example, Adahara here is a level 1 tuner, that's an Earth. You throw this in with something like, say, Trap Tricks, boom, you have access to Naturia Beast. You throw this in something like Blue Eyes, boom, easy access to your synchro plays like your Spirit Dragon, etc. The rank, you know, you also can use these guys for any Xyz play for the correlating level. I swear I speak English, guys. You also can use them for, like, you know, just their own effects. You want to abuse non-effect monsters? Yeah, that's pretty good. There's actually a lot of decks out there that can do it. We actually have other decks coming in the future that are going to have it. Now, this is just an example, but I'm using them as an example for other things, not just the deck that's coming that's going to be using them, that Synchro deck. something sword or whatever. And then of course the Brave deck uses tokens, so they can use them too. But what I'm getting at is using these guys as extenders if you just need cards to special summon. You probably have seen a lot of like Water Exceeds decks using it. They use the Water Tingy. You could do this with the other correlating attributes as well. This is another one I think you should have on hand right here, is these cards. I picked these up pretty easily. Basically, for when the format evolves into being more light and dark attribute oriented, you want to have these on hand. Especially if you're either playing a dragon deck or you're playing a deck that doesn't really care about light dark attributes. This is a really good card to use your normal summon for. Because basically what Kakumiro Drago is going to do is he's going to lock out light and darks, and that's just, you know, it's almost as good as a barrier statue. And you never know. Who knows? Konami down the road could end up making something like this, like the barrier statue combo, but for dragons. And this guy would be a very good dragon choice. So you never know. Some other cards you might want to have on hand, and I'm just going to pull this one out for this one just because it's going to represent an example of something more than anything. Is you want like budget trap cards that are very splashable. I'm using the Paleozoic ones. Candina here is a prime example of that. Spot removal is important. This card's basically just Book of Moon, but you get the idea. You can also play the one that you can also play the one that banishes, Dinomischus, which I don't have on hand right now to picture, or you could also use Oilonetis. Got some other things you should probably keep on hand. The point is really just you want to have cards that are splashable. And that's what those two Paleozoics and Dinomischus are examples of. They are splashable cards. Alright, I gathered some cards out of my collection because it was going to take too long to show you them in the books like I did at first. But that's okay. The point that I want to get at is you want to also make sure that you're paying attention to reprints and getting yourself some just decent cards. Like when you're on a budget and you have to like think about cards that are cheap, that fill a certain role. You know, it's good to be paying attention to what's getting reprinted, etc. And for this example, this card is you want to look at your removal. That's what these cards are examples of. Grand Pulse is kind of a being a token card for just extra deck. You know, anything that's going to get rid of back row, basically. That's kind of what Linkslayer, Hatrunade, and Grand Pulse here representing. You could replace Grand Pulse with Tornado Dragon. Nightmare Phoenix is the popular, just one card, you know, get rid of a back row card. That's all this card's representing. It's all going to depend on what deck you have. You can also, like I said, Nightmare Phoenixes are pretty cheap right now, but the point is just to show you case a easy card to use. And then, like I said, you're gonna want back row hate. You're gonna want things that are like monster removal, but also, like, if you can, get yourself a Pankratops. You want at least one copy of this card in your deck because, frankly, this card it can take out 2 cards potentially from your opponent for 1 card. And then, of course, you got things like Hatrunade. This card won't destroy the back row, but sometimes getting rid of it or forcing out negations is enough. And then, of course, you know, having cards like Eater of Millions. Like I said, this card is non-targeting removal, which can be useful. Like, for example, if you were up against a Dragoon, it's a big pain in the butt. After it's wasted its negate, you can just play this and banish it. It's just an example of a card that can help you get through things like that. And then, of course, like I know people don't really like Dark Hole. Lightning Storms is the optimal card because it hits both front and back row. But you know, with its price tag, it's ridiculous. You can literally get Dark Holes for like 10 cents. So, you know, use what you can afford, basically, is what I'm getting at. And just because it's not the most optimal card doesn't mean it's not worth playing at all, is one thing I want to make. Sometimes your budget just won't allow you to do that. So that you definitely want to think about having removal that is removal in your collection. Just kind of generic removal, because multiple decks can actually use these cards. Another thing you want to think about is you're going to want to think about your floodgates. Remember I mentioned the parallel exceeds with your link plays? Boom, Baguska is a floodgate. It's going to stop everything except links and monsters that don't care. But yeah, depending on the deck you're playing, you're going to think about floodgates. Everybody hates floodgates. This is true. Just everybody does. I think even most players I know that play floodgates hate playing floodgates. Hate doing that. But sometimes, you know, when you're on a budget, this is what you will need to level the playing field. And as much as that sucks, yeah, You know, nobody wants to play against that, but unfortunately, because you can't afford a giant board of negates that are very expensive, especially once they start to get together and add up, yeah, this is what you'll need to do. You'll have to buy those budget negations. Or budget floodgates, I should say. Speaking of budget negations, you also might want to look into what cards are being reprinted that actually negate. Lost Wind is just an example of something. Like, say, if you're playing Danger Dark World, you could easily, like, toss this in. You know, it's just an example of a deck that you might play that's on. And some other things you might want to think about, and I've been preaching it with the 10 Ys, is extenders. Monster Reborn kind of serves that purpose, as well as getting back key cards. And you might also want to look into cheap draw cards. Now, yes, we can't always afford the pot cards, but things like Allure of Darkness and this are really good replacements, and here's the reason why. You're going to use those cards, and this card, and these cards are probably going to get ashed, but using these cards means that when you get ashed, it hurts less, because usually this is the only card that goes, which is what you want to think about when you're doing that. This is why trade-in and cards of consonance, for example, are a lot more of a gamble in the current game right now, where Ash Blossom exists, whereas things like Spellbook of Knowledge and Allure of Darkness are less of a risk, because their cost doesn't necessarily get paid if they get negated, so to speak. You activate, you target the spellcaster, then they negate, and then you, oh well. And that may not be the ruling with this one, but I do for sure, it's just an example, but as for sure with Allure of Darkness, you don't banish if they negate it. And then of course, other things you might want to think about is, you know, budget extra deck monsters. So you can't afford something like Extra Code Talker. You can probably afford a 10 Yi. This, the Berserker 10 Yi monster. Quasar, it can kind of be annoying because you can force the opponent to battle it instead of the cards that they actually want to battle. And then Vespinato here, if you're playing Xyz monsters, you can slap this card over a 4, right? And the cool thing about that is you threw it on a 4 that's already used all of its materials. And then once you've done that, you throw this guy on top of them, and then when they do eventually destroy this card, you're gonna get back a level 4. So it's kind of a floating / recursion, and that is just it's a cheap card. You can literally toss this in any deck, and also you can, by the way, this also doesn't just work for rank 4s. You can climb, if you can afford a downer position. I think it's a little on the pricey side right now, but if you happen to get one, you can climb into that, then climb into this, and then it will die. And that's how you could play this in a rank 3 deck, something like Burning Abyss or PK, as an example. So it's just, you know what I mean. And I actually use this in my dinosaur deck. Fun fact: I like to use this in my dinosaur deck because when this card dies, he'll get me back an Oviraptor, and then Oviraptor will search me another card so I can play on my turn, assuming that doesn't get negated. And even if it does, sometimes that's not so bad, because when that negation happens, they might have wasted a key negation card, like say a Solemn Strike, you know, something like that they don't get to use on my turn. So just food for thought. That's really all this video really is. This is just a food for thought type video. All right, there you have it, guys. Those were some examples of cards I think that you can kind of have, and I do want to stress this very much so. These are supposed to be examples. I don't really, because I can't possibly know necessarily what your collection has in it. So some of these things are just examples, but there are things like I think you should, if you have Link monsters you will play that have down pointing arrows, you should totally play Parallel Xyz and Baguska. If you have a synchro deck, you should probably, that can go into 8s, you probably should have the 10 Yi guy. If you're playing Xyz decks, if you can't afford these higher priced decks and you have to go anti-meta, thinking about cheap floodgates, you know. So the idea is to give you some cards that I think you should have, like Pankratops, Baguska, Parallel Xyz, Galaxy Worm, etc. And I also in the same video offering you guys examples of cards, because as Konami constantly reprints stuff, yeah, it may not be the right time for that, but it doesn't mean that card that's being reprinted that everybody needs now, you should get it now while it's cheap, and then be prepared for it later, because a lot of these floodgatey type cards like Rivalry of Warlords, that thing comes in and out of formats all the time. So since Konami just reprinted it again, yeah, I think you should get your cheap copies now and have a playset at least ready to go for the sideboard for when that format does eventually roll around. I hope this video was very helpful for you guys. Let me know if there's anything that I missed that you think that budget players should have in their collection. If you have any other tips, please leave that in the comments below. Let's share that information. And do me a solid, guys. Share this video with anybody you know that's a budget player. You know, let's try to make this video a resource so budget players have all the options they can possibly ever think about. Like, I would love for this video, not only this video, but the comment section of this video, to be a great resource for budget players. My channel is definitely geared towards that, and I think I really want to try to keep it that way. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you'll see me show the fun stuff with all the high-priced cards on Edo Pro or something, but for the most part, I want to try to keep things budget and cheap and attainable, if that makes any sense. Anyway, guys, if you're new here, consider subscribing. I would greatly appreciate it. Leave me one of these, and guys, I will catch you in the next one.